So I want to talk for a minute about why we actually want team conflict. And that may come as a surprise to people. We often think about conflict as being detrimental to teams, but really conflict can be really valuable to teams. Now, not all conflict, and we're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about why team conflict is important and how we want to design for it. So let's get to it. The first thing here is to understand that there are different types of conflict. And so when we look at conflict, we need to think about it in three different dimensions. There's process conflict, there's task conflict, and there's relationship conflict. So let's start at the bottom there. Relationship conflict. This is what, when people normally think of conflict, this is what they're talking about. Personal, social issues. I don't get along with you. You don't get along with me. We argue all the time, and in not in like a positive and constructive way, but in a kind of a mean way, right? This is emotionally charged. That's relationship conflict. That's actually different from task conflict. Task conflict is disagreements about what the task is, about how we're going to accomplish the task. What are the best ideas that we can do, right? And so that's task conflict, a little bit different than relationship conflict. And then finally, process conflict, where there's disagreements about who is doing what and who has what resources on the team. What are the processes we're doing? So task is about what's the path to get there, and or what are we trying to achieve, and what's the path to get there. Process conflict is we have disagreements about who's going to do what on that path and how we're going to follow down that path. So let's talk about how this plays out. So there have been a number of studies done about the role of of conflict in team performance over time. And so I'm going to show you some curves on some graphs, right? So applying group 2 ideas to group 3 concepts here, that's what we do in psychology. So we have on the y-axis here, we have levels of conflict, right? And so we ask members of the teams that they're on, what is the level of conflict that you have? And then we looked at the early conflict, the middle, kind of the midpoint conflict, and then ending conflict and where they were. And then we separate out which teams performed well and which ones did not perform well, and which ones actually did a little bit worse. And what we found is that high-performing teams have less process conflict early. They both kind of have similar amounts or even more process conflict by the time they're finished, right? So getting to the end of the project and everything's coming due and trying to get done. But and these are finite teams that have beginning, middles, and ends. And are actually trying to get a project done. So early in the project, a high-performing team actually spends some time figuring out who has what roles, who brings what resources to the table. So we often give the advice of actually establishing what we might call a team charter or team contract, where you sit down in that initial meeting and you find out who has what resources they can bring, what are the norms of meetings that we're going to have, what are the behavioral norms that we're going to set, and how are we all going to operate with each other, so that we have that low process conflict. It's going to increase at some point anyway, but at least if we don't have it at the beginning, we can focus on other things and actually determining what it is that needs to be done. Now, a little bit different story when we talk about task conflict. So task conflict for a high-performing team, what we see here, I want you to look at the slope. For a high-performing team, what we see is an increase in task conflict. And at this point, task conflict for a high-performing team is actually higher than it is for a lower-performing team at the midpoint, and then it goes back down again. What does this illustrate, right? And then for a lower-performing team, they have kind of mid-range task conflict and just kind of stays low, gets even a little bit lower than the other team, and then it goes up towards the end. So let's imagine what's happening on these teams. That high-performing team, they're spending the first half of their existence in a real divergence phase. They're really leveraging the diversity of the team. They're coming with different ideas. They're thinking about different things. They're maybe having arguments about what to do. There's real struggles going on about how it is that we're going to accomplish. And these reach some height about halfway. And then leaders will step in, either formal leaders or even informal leaders will step in, and it's amazing to watch this happen. What you actually see is somebody will step in and say, hey guys, we're like halfway done. We need to get on this. We need to actually put the rubber to the road. And then you have convergence around the ideas, right? So there's this initial uh, divergence of ideas, and then you have convergence as we get to the execution phase of the idea, right? And so this really maps to this developmental process of forming, storming, norming, and performing. And this idea of that there's this storming phase where we have increased task conflict. Remember, this is conflict about what the task is and how we're going to accomplish it. What are the best ideas? And then we have this norming and performing phase where we come to an idea and then we go ahead and execute it. Compare that to the low performing team. This is the team that can't come to agreements about what needs to be done. But then everybody just kind of goes along at some point and just either assumes that there's no task conflict, everybody knows, or someone just imposes their will, right? So this is maybe an example of a team with a very dictatorial leader, a very hierarchy. The leader comes in and says, here is the plan. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and we're going to go do this thing. Not a lot of task conflict in this team because they have no opportunity for it. They don't have a chance to dialogue about what needs to be done. But then what happens is they get into this execution phase, and now we start to see problems because now they're starting to fail. Either because they don't know what to do or because they think they have better ideas about what could be done as they get to the end, right? This is that team where we have that person towards the end saying, wait, maybe we should do it this way. It's like, dude, you should have been at the earlier part when we were brainstorming about this. Oh, well, I just wanted everybody to get along, and I didn't want to really generate any conflict because I was so afraid of conflict that I was unwilling to do it. The takeaway for you as a leader: you should engender conflict, task conflict in the beginning part. Now, this doesn't mean get people at each other's throats. This means encourage voice, encourage people to have conversations and arguments about what's going to happen. Build that safe space so people can bring different ideas, and then help and facilitate the team to coalesce around the best idea out of the group, or in the amalgamation of best ideas, and then execute that going forward, as opposed to just keeping down conflict either by ordering it or by not really encouraging people to participate, and then basically reap the failures that come with that. So that's two types of conflict, right? We talked about process conflict, we talked about task conflict, and then there's relationship conflict. And here, relationship conflict, always bad, right? And so for that high performing team, it always has lower relationship conflict than is true for the lower performing team. We actually do want to avoid relationship conflict. Now, this is hard because task conflict, if not managed well, and you don't actually have a safe environment for it, it can result in relationship conflict. So this is, again, an important role for the leader in managing team conflict in order to achieve higher levels of performance. So to go with that, there's some design considerations when, as a leader, we are putting together the team. One, we want to make sure that the task is clearly defined. So not the how it should be done, that we leave up to the conflict to figure out, but what is the outcome that needs to happen, that gets clearly defined right from the beginning. Again, team size, we want to make sure that it's not a huge team, because the bigger a team is, the more relationship conflict is actually going to arise. So it's at least enough people, but not everybody. You want to make sure the team has a diversity of required skills and competencies, task-related skills, but also you don't want to just select people for their task-related skills. You also want to select them for their ability to work on a team, right? Do they play well with others? Do they have those interpersonal and team skills that are so important? You really want to bring onto the team a diversity of ideas, functions, and perspectives. Why? Because they help build that task conflict. They help bring in all of these different ideas so the team can actually come out with the greatest idea. Now, look, this is important. You actually have to spend some time early on doing this design. Good team design is actually more important. You don't even need a good leader. It helps, but you don't need a good leader if you have good team design. You get the best people on the team. You lay out the task ahead of time, and it's very clear. And then those people can come in, they can have those arguments about what to do and what are the best ways to do it, and then they can come together and actually do it. So design is really an important part of this process. And in fact, this idea of diversity and the idea that we have people with different perspectives on the team, we really want to design that in from the beginning, right? Because when we do that, we have an expanded talent pool. We have more people on the team who know what to do, all sorts of different things. We get improved team performance by having these additional perspectives that allow us to see bigger ideas and be able to find the best ideas, because we get these multiple viewpoints. We get better decision making, and we get a competitive advantage from having a diverse team. Now, that said, it doesn't come without challenges, right? It's tough to achieve. There are certainly problems with in-group, out-group problems, and social fault lines and subgroups and discrimination and prejudice that can happen on a team with a lot of diversity. And we have to consider that, right? And we can talk about, when we talk about diversity, surface level diversity, which is like that demographic kind of being diverse on the stupid stuff, and we can talk about diversity in terms of deep level diversity, these different points of view and having these different things that come in. This can bring more conflict, right? More diversity can bring more conflict. We really have to pay attention to that. We also want to be careful about what we call solos and tokens, right? So that you have the token person on your team, right, who's just kind of representative of their group, who are there by themselves and have to answer on behalf of their entire group. That can be very challenging for that person. And so we got to be careful. Even though we're designing for diversity, we just always include that one person, right? So the obvious example of this is at the Academy, we have very few Black women, right? Midshipmen, staff, same thing. And so they often find themselves being asked to be on various different committees, various different teams, and really having to go above and beyond many of their compatriots because they're the only person they get pulled in to do all this stuff. And it can be very difficult. Research also suggests that really more than two people from a particular demographic group is important, that actually two people can be even worse than just having one person. And you really want to have lots of people from various different groups, right? Not just different demographic groups, but different functional groups, different departments and different tenures and different ranks and all these, and you want to bring in diversity from all different perspectives. To manage for diversity, you need to recruit well. Which means you really need to expand the pool of recruited people. If you are not recruiting well, I tell you, yeah, this is how you end up with a bunch of white men. And I'm just being honest here. That's how you get there, is because you don't pay attention to recruiting, and that's all who end up applying, and that's where you end up with it. And there's lots of reasons that we could do a whole class on the social psychology of what opportunities are available to people, but those are the results. If you recruit well, though, now you can start to build in some diversity. You have to have a public commitment to diversity, right? People have to believe you when you're going to do it, and you have to give voice to different demographic groups. All right, and again, talking here not just about demography and the color of people's skins and their gender, et cetera. I'm talking about diversity at all levels, about different functions and different ages and different tenures with the organization, different points of view and different departments. And all of those people have to feel like they have a voice, like they have a place at the table and are actually participating in that diverse design. This is how we get to the value of diversity. This is how we actually achieve those force multiplier outcomes from having diverse teams, by getting the task conflict that lets us have different ideas and bring the best ideas to the fore, and then still maintaining a team because we have good leadership, and we're able to reduce the relationship conflict, the negative kind of conflict, and allow us to execute in the end. Team development, again, we've learned already a little bit about forming, norming, storming, performing. We need to think about team development, right? It's not just the team design, but it's team design and development. Explicitly establishing processes, norms, routines of the team. Outlining roles and responsibilities, understanding who's doing what functions, establishing feedback mechanisms. We've talked about the importance of performance evaluations and feedback and monitoring and assessment. This all needs to be built into the team. Building communication norms. All of this will, in addition to just making the team work better, reducing process loss, this also will increase cohesion. It helps build the team's collective identity. It fosters team learning, helps the team to perform better. This stuff is actually more important than building trust, right? So all of the trust falls that we can do in the world, and all the barbecues that we can go out for, and these shared experiences that build trust, those are great. But that being said, doing this stuff, actually explicitly, intentionally, deliberately doing team design and team development will bring about better teams overall. And look, I'm serious. This is stuff you just write down. You do it in a team charter or team contract right from the beginning, or at least having a discussion about who's going to do what the norms are going to be, what the routines are going to be, what the communication is going to be like. All this stuff is going to pay dividends in the long term for the team's processes and performance.